My child, pause here for a moment. Do not scroll past these words as if this were just another passing message, because what I need to tell you cannot wait until later tonight or tomorrow morning. I need your attention now, exactly as you are, even with the noise in your mind and the heaviness sitting in your chest. Before your eyes landed here, before your thumb stopped moving, before you took that deeper breath without even realizing it, I already knew this moment would arrive. I arranged this meeting with care because some moments appear ordinary on the surface, while carrying eternal weight underneath them. This is one of those moments, and your spirit already feels that something about this is different. These are not empty words meant to comfort you for a few minutes before life pulls you back into distraction again. I came into this moment with urgency because something that has been delayed is now standing at the edge of release, and I will not allow you to miss what heaven is placing before you. I am with you even now, closer than the thoughts racing through your mind and closer than the breath moving through your body. The room around you may look exactly the same walls, the same dim light, the same quiet hum of ordinary life. Yet something deeper has already begun to shift. My presence does not always arrive through dramatic signs or visible change. Sometimes it comes through a stillness so deep that your spirit recognizes it before your mind can explain why your breathing suddenly feels lighter. Sometimes I draw near while you are lying awake, staring at the ceiling long after everyone else has gone to sleep, replaying the same worries and hoping tomorrow will hurt less than today. Sometimes I reach you in the middle of an ordinary moment, when you pick up your phone only to distract yourself from the weight you have been carrying inside. And sometimes I come so close that your heart feels it before words can even form. If you keep listening, the heaviness you carried into this moment will not leave the same way it arrived. Nothing about your struggle escaped me before this message began. I know the thoughts that kept circling through your nights while the room stayed quiet around you. I know the silent pressure you carried through grocery store aisles, work conversations, long drives, and ordinary routines while pretending your mind was somewhere lighter than it really was. I know the smile you gave people while part of you quietly wondered how much longer you could keep holding yourself together. I did not come into this moment unaware of any of it. I entered this room already knowing every hidden ache, every fear you tried to reason away, every conversation you avoided because explaining your pain felt more exhausting than staying silent. And hear me clearly. There are times when heaven allows silence because silence itself prepares the soul. But there are also moments when silence must end because waiting any longer would wound your heart more deeply than the delay already has. That is why your attention was interrupted right now. That is why something inside you keeps pulling you to stay with these words a little longer. Your spirit already senses that this moment carries more than temporary comfort. If you leave too quickly, you may continue carrying fears into places where I have already begun settling what fear kept trying to convince you was hopeless. Too many times you stood close to peace while still listening more carefully to your doubts than to my voice. Too many times you nearly received rest, yet walked away before peace had fully reached the deeper places inside you. So today I am not speaking from a distance or whispering faintly through the noise. I am speaking directly into this hour because what feels like an ordinary part of your day has quietly become a doorway, and I need your heart to hear me before you move forward. The waiting that exhausted you has reached its limit. I know how long those days felt when you tried to stay hopeful while disappointment slowly wore down your strength. I know there were nights when you sat alone in the dark, wondering if the prayers you once whispered with confidence had somehow drifted too far away to ever be answered. And maybe part of you stopped expecting anything at all because disappointment began to feel easier to survive than hope. You kept speaking with faith while privately wondering how much longer your spirit could live stretched between trust and exhaustion. You smiled through conversations while your mind was somewhere else entirely, carrying fears you did not know how to explain without breaking down. Some of your tiredness came from pretending you were stronger than you truly felt. Some of your silence came from being too emotionally worn down to keep telling people you were okay when your heart knew otherwise. Even so, you kept moving. You kept answering people kindly while carrying battles nobody around you could fully see. Heaven remained close to every quiet surrender you made when no one applauded your endurance. and every hidden moment of pain still reached me completely. And now I need you to understand this clearly, my child. The season that drained your heart was never meaningless. None of those long nights were wasted, and none of the tears you tried to wipe away before anyone noticed were ignored. Even while you thought nothing was changing, things were already moving beyond what your eyes could see. Certain doors remained closed because the wrong timing would have damaged what the right timing is finally prepared to release. Before you whispered the same prayer again while driving in silence or lying awake with your thoughts racing past midnight, I had already placed your name in my hands. Before another tear gathered in your eyes while you stared at your phone trying to distract yourself from the heaviness in your chest, I had already touched the situation that was troubling you. Nothing you carried ever drifted beyond my reach, not even for a moment. There were nights you believed you were still waiting for me to begin moving, but heaven had already started working long before your next cry reached my presence. There were conversations happening beyond your awareness where decisions had already been made about what would remain and what would fall away. Some outcomes you feared never reached your life because my hand stopped them before they fully formed. Certain burdens you assumed were still unresolved were already being settled quietly while you continued bracing yourself for the worst. And that is why I need your full attention now, because your emotions are still reacting to battles that have already been touched by my authority. Your mind keeps returning to questions that heaven has already answered. Your heart is still preparing itself for pain that no longer carries the same power it once seemed to hold. If you want Jesus at the center of everything in your life, type, "Jesus be glorified in my life." And stay with these words a little longer, because what comes next is not shallow encouragement meant to briefly soothe your emotions before fear returns again. There are words that comfort for a moment, and there are words that reach into the deeper places inside a weary soul. What I am speaking now belongs to that deeper place. I know how often you searched for one clear word that could quiet the noise in your mind while you sat alone in your room, replaying every possibility and every fear. One real word that would reach the part of you no conversation, distraction, or exhausted sleep could fully touch. Something inside you already knows this moment matters. Your spirit has been waiting for words that feel alive enough to break through the numbness that tiredness placed over your hope. If you rush away too quickly, you may continue carrying fears and burdens that I already intended to lift from your shoulders. But if you remain open while you listen, you will begin noticing that something inside you has already started loosening, even before your mind fully understands why. Nothing about your pain was hidden from me. I remained close through the tears that came quietly while the rest of the house was asleep, and through the silent prayers you whispered into darkness because you no longer had the energy to explain everything out loud. I stayed near the moments when you smiled through conversations while secretly wondering how much longer you could keep pretending to be strong. I stayed close when you turned your face away so no one would ask questions you were too emotionally exhausted to answer. I knew about the thoughts you kept buried because you were afraid people would misunderstand your heart. I heard the private questions that rose inside you when you were too tired to sound confident, too worn down to force spiritual language, and too honest to hide your disappointment anymore. And hear this clearly. Your honesty never pushed me away. Even when your prayers sounded weak, frustrated, or uncertain, I remained beside you through every trembling moment and every silence that followed your tears. Every hidden conversation still reached heaven completely. Even now, while you are listening, my presence is moving gently through the space around you. Not because the room itself is special, but because wherever you are, I know how to reach beyond what is visible and touch the places inside your spirit that have carried too much weight for too long. The air around you may feel completely ordinary right now. The same room, the same quiet sounds, the same unfinished parts of your day still waiting for you afterward. But my presence has never depended on dramatic signs in order to be real. Sometimes I move so gently that peace reaches you before your mind can explain why your breathing suddenly slows down. Sometimes your chest begins to loosen before you even realize the fear you carried into this moment has started losing its grip. And sometimes tears rise without warning while you sit there trying to understand why emotion suddenly feels so close to the surface. Your spirit often recognizes my nearness before language can fully explain what your heart is experiencing. So let yourself become still enough to notice what is already shifting inside you. The version of you that first entered this message is already beginning to feel lighter in places where heaviness had lived for too long. If you remain open while listening, the weight you carried here will not leave unchanged. What I have sealed over your life cannot be undone by another person's opinion, misunderstanding, delay, resistance, or doubt. Human voices may continue speaking around you, and circumstances may still appear unfinished when you look at them with natural eyes. But what rests under my hand does not become unstable because someone else failed to recognize its value. Too often you measured my work through the reactions of people around you. Too often you feared that someone's rejection, someone's absence, or someone else's choices could somehow undo what I promised you in private moments of prayer. But hear me clearly now. What I establish carries my authority, not human permission. What I finish does not suddenly become fragile because circumstances seem slow or because answers take longer than you expected. Before what has already been prepared is fully released, you need to understand why the waiting lasted as long as it did. If I had answered immediately, relief would have arrived before the deeper work inside your spirit had time to form. You would have celebrated the outcome without recognizing how much protection was hidden inside the delay itself. Some things were being strengthened quietly inside you while you believed only silence was happening. If everything had opened the moment you first cried out, you may have mistaken timing for coincidence instead of seeing my hand clearly within it. You were looking for quick relief, but heaven was also protecting your future from things your present heart was not yet ready to carry. So stay present in this moment, my child, because what comes next will help you understand why your waiting held meaning far deeper than you realized. And when you finally see what was being preserved during the delay, you will understand why what is coming cannot be compared to what you feared losing. I came before you had to ask again because I knew the next prayer forming inside you would sound different from the prayers you once prayed when faith still felt easy. I knew another sleepless night, another silent drive home, or another moment sitting alone with your thoughts might leave your heart speaking with less strength than before. There is a difference between the prayers you prayed when hope felt alive inside you, and the prayers whispered when you were simply trying not to emotionally collapse under disappointment. I know the sound of your soul when trust rises naturally, and I know the quieter sound it makes when faith feels fragile and exhausted. That is why I stepped into this moment before another tired sentence had to rise from your heart pretending to sound hopeful while secretly carrying fear underneath it. Before another tear slipped down your face while you sat alone in the dark trying to convince yourself you were still okay. Before another silent breakdown happened in a room where nobody else knew how much pressure you had been carrying. Heaven already understood what your silence was saying long before your words could fully explain it. And yes, there were moments when you quietly wondered why I had not spoken sooner. You looked at the delays, the uncertainty, the unanswered questions, and part of you wondered why one word from me had not already calmed the storm inside your mind. Even when you never spoke those thoughts out loud, they still reached me completely. I heard them during the nights when you looked upward with exhausted eyes, trying to pray respectfully while confusion still sat heavily inside your chest. I heard the moments when you opened your mouth to speak and then stopped because asking one more time felt emotionally heavier than remaining silent. I heard every weary thought that passed through your mind while you wondered whether heaven still saw how hard you were trying to hold yourself together. But understand this now, my child. I did not remain silent earlier because nothing was happening. Earlier was shaping parts of you that could only be formed through waiting. It was separating the things you thought you desperately needed from the things your spirit truly needed in order to remain whole. There were places inside your heart that only delay could uncover, places that would have stayed hidden if relief had arrived too quickly. That season was teaching you the difference between trusting visible signs and trusting my hand, even when you could not see movement yet. If I had answered the moment you first cried out for relief, you would have felt temporary comfort. But you would not have recognized the deeper strength quietly forming underneath the surface of your life. Some growth only happens in hidden places, in the long nights when faith becomes less emotional and more intentional. And even though you did not fully understand it then, Heaven was still working carefully inside those unseen places. This moment is not random. The way your attention stopped here, the way your thoughts slowed long enough for your spirit to listen, even the heaviness that followed you through today, none of it arrived without purpose. There was a reason your chest felt tighter lately, a reason your mind kept searching for one clear sign that things were finally going to change. Long before you understood why this season felt so exhausting, heaven already knew this exact moment would meet you here. There are seasons when time stretches longer than you expected because timing itself becomes part of the healing process. Sometimes answers wait because if they arrive too early, they only comfort emotions for a moment instead of transforming something deeper inside the soul. But there also comes a point when waiting reaches its edge, and that is the place where you have been standing. What was prepared quietly in silence has now reached the moment where your heart can finally receive it without misunderstanding everything the delay was building inside you. This is not simply a convenient moment, it is precise. It is the kind of moment where what once looked painfully delayed suddenly begins revealing that nothing was actually late. Heaven watched your breaking point more closely than you realize. There were days when you still looked functional on the outside, answering messages, showing up to responsibilities, smiling politely in conversations, while inwardly you felt like one more disappointment might completely drain what little strength remained. I stayed close during the moments when your thoughts became so crowded that even silence felt loud inside your mind. I knew about the nights when you sat around other people while feeling emotionally distant from everyone in the room, as though part of your spirit had quietly withdrawn somewhere no one else could reach. I knew when you smiled simply because explaining your pain would have taken more energy than you had left. And I knew the moments when you kept forcing yourself forward because stopping felt more frightening than continuing. There was also a quieter moment that mattered deeply in heaven. The moment your heart started preparing itself to expect less, because hope had become painful to carry. Humans often call that endurance, but I know the difference between strong faith and a weary soul trying not to collapse in front of others. I watched both happening inside you at the same time. There were moments when you nearly gave up, even though the people around you may never have realized how close you were. You still completed what needed to be done. You still moved through routines, answered kindly, and carried yourself like someone holding everything together. But underneath that outward strength, another reality was forming quietly inside you. You were not surrendering your love for me. You were slowly surrendering the belief that certain things would ever change. You may not have called it giving up because your prayers still existed, but your expectations began shrinking in order to protect your heart from more disappointment. Your prayers became shorter. Your thoughts stopped reaching as far into the future as they once did. Part of you started telling yourself not to hope too deeply anymore because hope itself had begun to feel emotionally expensive. And that exact moment is one reason I came before you asked again. Heaven never ignores the point where a heart starts closing itself simply to survive pain. There were moments when you stopped expecting, not because you stopped loving me and not because faith disappeared completely, but because repeated silence slowly taught your emotions to brace themselves for disappointment. Your spirit kept trying to resist that story, even while your emotions were growing tired of waiting. You watched time continue moving and quietly wondered whether what you once believed had simply belonged to another season. Maybe the thing you hoped for had been misunderstood. Maybe you had held on to something too deeply for too long. You still prayed, but your expectation had become careful and guarded, almost like someone trying to protect a wound from being opened again. Instead of reaching toward me with boldness, you reached carefully. Instead of asking with confidence, you spoke softly, almost apologetically, as though trying to prepare yourself emotionally in case disappointment returned again. And none of those changes escaped my notice. I recognized every subtle retreat in your confidence, every quiet adjustment your heart made while trying to survive the weight of prolonged silence. And understand this too, my child. I never condemned your weariness. I understood it fully because I knew how long the silence had stretched over your life and how hard you tried to remain steady underneath it. There were nights when you sat at the edge of your bed staring into the dark, wondering why nothing seemed to move even though your need felt so clear inside you. You kept trying to hold on, but sometimes peace only came in fragments, and you quietly wondered why relief never seemed to arrive completely. There were moments when your prayer sounded soft and respectful, and there were moments when frustration slipped into your voice because your heart felt exhausted from carrying the same weight for so long. And then there were nights when you stopped speaking altogether, sitting in silence with your thoughts because even asking again felt emotionally heavy. Part of you began wondering whether silence meant distance. What hurt you most was not only the waiting itself, but the fear that maybe you were facing life without hearing me clearly anymore. But listen carefully now, because this is what I need your heart to finally understand. You believed silence meant absence, when in truth silence was where I was preparing the answer. If you run to God for safety and hope, say, "God, you are my hiding place." Silence was never empty space. Silence was movement happening beyond what your eyes could measure. While you believed nothing was changing, pieces you did not even know existed were slowly being aligned. What looked closed to you was being handled with precision, care, and timing far deeper than human understanding could see in the moment. Certain things were being protected from arriving too early because what comes before the right season can sometimes wound instead of heal. Even your own heart was being strengthened quietly so you could carry what is coming without collapsing beneath its weight. If I had answered every cry immediately, you would have experienced relief. But you would not have gained the depth now living inside you. You would have known comfort for a moment, but not the kind of clarity that changes the way your spirit stands after surviving something difficult. There is a strength inside you now that did not exist before this season, even though the process of forming it often felt painful and hidden. Some of the things that once felt impossible for you to carry no longer hold the same power over you because you endured more than you thought you could survive. You often believed that if I truly understood how emotionally exhausted you were, I would have spoken sooner. But my child, I saw much more than your tiredness alone. I also saw what would have happened if certain hidden processes had been interrupted before their time was complete. I saw the people who still needed to move away from your path before certain doors could safely open. I saw unseen resistance that still had to weaken before your answer could stand securely without being destroyed later. I saw fears hidden deep inside you that still needed to rise to the surface so they would no longer quietly control your future decisions. What looked like silence from your perspective was layered with protection, timing, correction, mercy, and preparation all at once. Even now, when you look back at certain moments, there are things you still do not fully understand. But one day you will realize that some of the delays that hurt you most became the very things that protected you from greater pain later. Some frustrations became shields you did not recognize while you were living through them. And some closed doors were never rejection at all. They were preservation wrapped in silence. And now I am speaking because the season where silence was necessary has reached its limit for this part of your journey. I am speaking because your heart has carried enough unanswered weight for one season. Heaven watched how close you came to believing that nothing was changing while unseen movement was already happening all around you. I am speaking now because you need certainty that I was closest during the moments when you felt most unsure. Before another exhausted prayer had to rise from your lips, before another sleepless night taught your heart to expect less, I stepped into this moment because everything the silence was preparing is connected to what comes next. And none of it will fully make sense until you understand this first. I never stepped away from you, not even once. My child, nothing about your hidden battles escaped me, not even the parts you never explained because you believed no one would fully understand what was happening inside your mind. I stayed near during those nights when the room finally became quiet, but your thoughts refused to quiet down with it. The lights were off. The world around you had settled, yet inside you there were still worries replaying, memories returning, and questions circling the same places until even your breathing started feeling heavier. While everything outside looked calm, your mind kept moving like a storm that would not fully rest. I knew the nights when you kept turning from one side of the bed to the other, hoping sleep would finally silence the noise in your head. Instead, the silence only made every thought louder. Your eyes closed, but your heart stayed awake, carrying emotions you did not know how to release, and conversations that never happened out loud. While everyone else assumed you were resting, heaven understood you were fighting battles no one around you could hear. There were nights when tears came without warning because you had been holding too much inside yourself all day long. You answered people normally, completed tasks, smiled through conversations, and kept moving as though your chest was not carrying extra weight. But when everything slowed down again, what you buried during the day rose back to the surface. Sometimes you sat staring at the ceiling or scrolling through your phone without really paying attention to anything on the screen because your mind was too exhausted to settle. Sometimes you wiped your tears quickly as though hiding from your own reflection. Sometimes you said nothing at all because words had grown too tired, yet your tears were already speaking for you. Every one of those moments reached me completely. Even when you struggled to explain why sadness seemed stronger at night, I understood exactly what your soul was carrying underneath the surface. I also knew about the hidden stress that followed you through ordinary routines. Your body kept functioning, but your thoughts remained under pressure almost constantly. I saw you replying to messages while already feeling emotionally drained before the conversation even started. I saw you standing around people while quietly calculating how much strength remained just to make it through the rest of the day. Responsibilities that once felt simple suddenly became heavy because your spirit was already tired before the morning had fully begun. Other people saw you functioning, but I saw you enduring. I saw the effort it took to walk into rooms acting normal while inwardly wondering how much longer you could keep holding everything together. And there were moments when betrayal added pain you never expected to carry. Sometimes it came through careless words from someone you trusted deeply. Sometimes it came through silence during the exact moment you hoped someone would stay beside you. And sometimes it came through realizing that a person you believed truly understood your heart had misunderstood you completely. Long after those moments passed, your mind kept replaying conversations and expressions, trying to understand how something that once felt safe suddenly became painful. You questioned yourself afterward, wondering if you trusted too openly or expected too much. That wound touched more than your feelings. It affected your ability to rest peacefully, your ability to trust quietly again, and your ability to believe closeness would not eventually become pain. And still, my child, you kept pretending you were okay because part of you did not want to become another burden for someone else to carry. You learned how to arrange your expression before walking into rooms so your pain would not immediately show on your face. You became skilled at saying, "I'm fine," while secretly hoping nobody would ask again because explaining what was happening inside you required emotional energy you no longer had left. You laughed when the moment required laughter, answered kindly, completed routines, and protected people from seeing the full weight you were privately carrying. But even while you hid your exhaustion from others, nothing about it was hidden from me. I knew every smile that appeared while tension still sat tightly in your chest. I knew the conversations where your mouth kept responding while your mind had already drifted somewhere heavy and exhausted. Most people only saw the version of you that kept moving forward. They did not understand how much courage ordinary moments required from you. There were days when even answering a text or walking into a store felt heavier than it should have because your spirit was already carrying unfinished pain from earlier hours. Your heart longed for one safe place where no explanations would be necessary because you were tired of carrying your emotions and even more tired of translating them into words for someone else. But hear me clearly, my child. I never looked at your hidden exhaustion with disappointment. I looked at it with compassion because I understood every layer that quietly built up inside you over time. Grief, pressure, disappointment, unanswered thoughts, and wounds you still struggled to speak aloud. Every tear still mattered before heaven. Every trembling breath in the middle of the night reached me completely. There were nights when you thought the room held only your thoughts and your exhaustion, but my presence remained beside you the entire time. I stayed near when words stopped working and prayer became nothing more than breathing through pain one moment at a time. And I also stayed near the mornings that followed those difficult nights, when you gathered yourself in front of the mirror, answered messages, stepped back into responsibilities, and kept moving forward even while yesterday's heaviness still remained inside you. Still, you kept trying, and heaven saw every bit of that strength.